Hi everyone, my name is Crystal Allegri and I'm the director of the Extreme History Project. And for those of you who don't know, Extreme History is a nonprofit public history organization located right here in Bozeman. And we do a lot of fun public history engagement events. And right now we're thinking about historic walking tours because they are coming up. Walking tour season is starting Memorial Day weekend. So how many of you in here have taken one of our walking tours? Yay! Almost everybody. That's amazing. Yeah, Brandon, raise your hand twice. You've taken every single one. But we are thinking about walking tour season because it's coming up, like I said, Memorial Day weekend. We kick off all of our tours. So if you haven't taken a walking tour with us, sign up, go to our website, extremehistoryproject.org, and sign up for a walking tour. They're lots of fun, and we have some great walking tour guides this season. So I'd like to start off this evening by thanking our sponsor for this presentation this evening, which is Colombo's Pizza and Pasta. And yes, is Seth and Cassie here? I can't really see. There's one right there. Wonderful. Perfect. We clapped right when you came in. And we have Janet Colombo sitting. Now I see Janet right there in the front as well. We're so glad to have you sponsoring the presentation this evening because Colombo's is located within the Westgate Shopping Center. So Scott, I'm sure will be talking a little bit more about this evening. But if you haven't gone into Colombo's for a slice of pizza and a beer lately, head on in. Great pizza, as many of you well know. My particular favorite is the Bobcat Special. Sausage, mushrooms, and olives. You can't go wrong. So now I'm getting hungry. So thanks so much to Colombo's for sponsoring the presentation this evening. Now I also wanted to talk about just two more things before we get to Scott. And one of those is we have a special walking tour coming up on May 27th, kind of to kick off walking tour season. And that is with two of our special guest tour guides, Paul Stouffer and Susan Anderegg. And they're going to be doing a tour called Where in Bozeman. And it's based upon their book, which is called Where in Bozeman. So they're going to take us downtown and wander around with us and show us some very unique and fascinating objects and items and features in downtown Bozeman that you probably have walked by a million times and just have never seen. So that tour is is going to be on May 27th. We're doing 2 time slots for that, 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So if you want to take that tour, I highly recommend it. Go to our website and you'll see all the information there, extremehistoryproject.org. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is we have a cemetery workshop coming up this summer on June 27th. So last year we did a cemetery workshop here in Bozeman, and it focuses on the history of cemeteries, symbolism on headstones in cemeteries, and then preservation of headstones in cemeteries. And we did that last year here in Bozeman. We spent half a day at the Extreme History headquarters and then half a day in the Bozeman Sunset Mill Cemetery, and it was great. We loved it. So we're going to run it again this year, but this year we're going to do it in Deer Lodge, Montana. So Deer Lodge has an amazing cemetery. So if you want to join us, that information is also on our website at extremehistoryproject.org. And that's on June 27th. It's a day-long workshop. And we're going to be half of the day in the Deer Lodge Cemetery. So those are two great things that are coming up, but also our historic walking tour season. We have all of our returning tours that we've been doing for the last few years, and also the new Galligator tour that we're going to be doing. Oh, and we also have, reminded me because I just saw, I want to call you Fred. There we have the Fred Wilson expert, Richard Brown, and he's going to be doing a new Fred Wilson tour this year. So if you've gone on one of his Fred Wilson tours before, watch for this new one. He's going to be taking us to some new Fred Wilson design properties on the south side of town. So you won't want to miss that. So with that, I'm so excited to have Scott Carpenter here with us this evening to talk about his research on the Westgate Shopping Center. Scott Carpenter is President and Senior Cultural Resources Planner at Inner Resources Planning Incorporated that is located right here in Bozeman, Montana. He has more than 45 years of professional experience in the fields of archaeology, history, architectural history, and historic preservation planning. Scott received his BA in anthropology from the University of Colorado, and he earned a master's degree in museum studies from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. His employment has spanned positions with the University of Colorado, the Smithsonian Institute, Historic Annapolis, and the National Park Service, as well as so many, hundreds and hundreds of projects while working in Inner Resources Planning. So please join me in welcoming Scott Carpenter.
Well, good evening and welcome. Can everybody hear me okay? And I want to reiterate my welcome and appreciation to Janet and Cassie Colombo and Seth Cooper, owners of Colombo's and Westgate Village Shopping Center, not only for the great pizzas that we've all enjoyed almost forever, but also for their passion in historic preservation, to take kind of a nondescript mid-century, 20th century building and really look at it and wonder if there's something there, and as opposed to tearing it down and building something else, to really capture the ideas and the pleasure of knowing what wasn't here prior to 1957 and what was here after that, and to try to capitalize on that to create a firm preservation of the building. So I thank you guys for that. And thanks for all the pizza. I guess we could have had more folks had we brought a cake of beer and a little pizza down here. Let's see. This pointer was donated by George Jetson. So I'll see how I can use it. Nope, that's the... There it is. So, Westgate Shopping Center, as we see it today. Now, how many people have driven by on College and past this building? Everybody. How many people have stopped in at Colombo's? And how many people have stopped at Colombo's several times over the last 20 years or 25 years? So quite a few. So you know all the changes that have occurred on this building. And how many of you agree with Crystal about the favorite pizza? Okay, we're gonna have a couple. Yeah, I think we'll have a battle on that. So we all have our favorites. So kind of a nondescript building tucked away on the northwest side of Bozeman. And there's so many other things going on, especially traffic, that we don't always notice this gem. So Seth approached me about a year ago to look at this building because he wanted to pursue getting back to the historic signs that were there. And so we wanted to do some research on the building. And for a mid-century building, fairly small, we found out some very interesting things. It's the first planned clustered shopping center. And what I mean by that is a cluster of shops generally under one roof with parking around it. Something that didn't generally occur in the early part of the 20th century, and definitely in Bozeman, not in the 19th century, since all the commercial activity was down on Main Street. And this building was built in response to the post-World War II increase in student enrollment and the increasing residential development in Northwest Bozeman. And it was designed by the renowned...
Southwest.
Pardon me?
Southwest Bozeman.
Did I say? Oh, sorry, Southwest. It was designed by renowned local modernist architect Hugo Eck. We'll talk a little bit about him later. And it served as a template for future shopping centers in Bozeman, as it was the first shopping center built in Bozeman in 1957. So what we're going to talk about tonight, a little bit about the project tasks, the historical context, what was going on in the United States and Bozeman at the time of the beginning of this building. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the property, and then the architecture itself, and then a little bit about historic preservation. The project itself included historical research, architectural investigations and description, we prepared a historical property record and a historical sign plan, and also a historical preservation plan to try to make some changes to maintain the building, but also to get back to some of the key features that may have been altered or changed or disappeared over time. And as a footnote, I think I'm bringing this up later, that the building itself is about 90 to 95% intact as it was built in 1957. So it's a real easy project to get back to what it was. And we're currently working on a National Register nomination of this building. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So the historical research involved looking at deeds, Sanborn fire insurance maps, city directories, newspapers, special collections that were around, also building and sign permits, sewer connection permits, and then also because of the fairly recent history of this building, we were able to do a few oral histories of people who were business owners or people who had frequented this business before. The architectural investigation and description, including extensive building measurements, documentation, photography, construction forensics, where we could look at the building and how it was built, if there were any additions, how things were changed, things like that. Also looking at materials research, what was being used at that time, and how it was really in the forefront of mid-century architecture and construction. Then we did some paint analysis to try to go back. I won't try to reverse my pointer, but the paint today has kind of evolved over time with every tenant who's been there, so the consistency in paint has changed. So we want to go back to that. Again, I mentioned earlier we did a historic property record that describes about 40, 50 pages long, describing the history and all the characteristics of the building and the significance and the architectural importance of the building. Also did a historic sign plan to work with the city to get approval to recreate the historic signs, some of those that have been lost or removed, and then others that have changed each year, not every year, but every time that a tenant changed, how those signs. So again, trying to get a consistent base on that signs. And then we also developed a historic preservation plan. What types of historic preservation projects need to be undertaken to restore certain features of the building and also to maintain it. Then we worked on a determination of eligibility that we filed with the State Historic Preservation Office in Helena. And we applied the criteria for the National Register to look at the important elements of the history and architecture to determine if, to make a suggestion to the State Historic Preservation Office to designate it as a National Register listed building. And they did agree to that determination, and now we're working on the National Register nomination itself to submit. So what was happening, the historic context, what was happening in the United States, and to a certain extent throughout the world, one of the most major events in world history that affected literally everybody in this country as well as other countries, and that was World War II from 1941 to 45. And alongside of that came the GI Bill, which allowed for additional benefits to veterans, including low interest loans for home ownership, business development, and also higher education. So this was really important to the Westgate Shopping Center because of its proximity to Montana State College at the time, now MSU. And then of course the post-World War II U.S. economic expansion, which was definitely felt in Bozeman, which we'll talk about a little bit, a few slides later. So all of these things overlap, creating a dynamic economy which allowed for mobility, education, new jobs, new homes, increased purchases of goods, and a lot of freedoms that a lot of people before World War II weren't as easily confronted with. And even though the first shopping centers in the United States were built in the 1920s and 1930s, they really didn't take off till the post-war years in the late 1940s and 1950s. And by 1960, there were over 7,600 shopping centers in the US due to this same phenomenon of growth and development following World War II. Now, what was happening in Bozeman? Transportation, even though we had the railroad since 1875 and still continued until 1979, we had an airport back in the 1920s, but more along the lines of a crop duster and a few private airplanes. But in 1947, Northwest Airlines had its first scheduled air service into Bozeman. By 1967, Frontier Airlines had service to Missoula and Salt Lake City. So it was no longer just a small town out in the southwestern Montana. Of course, we talked a little bit about the railroad and how it still had passenger service until 1979. So that brought a lot of people, including students and employees at Montana State College. Interstate Highway 90 was finished through Bozeman in 1966. In 1956, commercial television with 2 channels via cable from Butte and Billings. And by 1959, there were 3 channels. So it was hard to just hide away in your quiet little place in Bozeman by that time. By 1950, Bozeman's population was just over 11,000 people and grew 18% by 1960 to just over 13,000. In 1958, Bozeman was defined as a retail trade area of over 24,000 square miles, and that included a population of 60,000 people. So it was a real hub of economic trade, agriculture, and of course the university at that time. Before 1957, most of the commercial retail spaces were located on Main Street in downtown Bozeman, with a few just off Main Street and some on 7th. And in 1958, just to pick a sample of businesses and how it was booming, there were 8 automobile dealers, 43 contractors, at least 43, probably more, some of them unlicensed, I'm sure, at that time, and over 28 real estate companies and agents in Bozeman. And there's probably 29 real estate agents in Bozeman now, maybe a few more. So again, throughout the United States, but also at Montana State College, the university was capitalizing on this extreme growth of popularity with students and then with employees to work on that. They couldn't build fast enough. New classrooms had to be built. Housing was in the form of small travel trailers and Quonset huts, which all occurring right after the end of the war. These are some statistics. The blue line shows the fall head count of students at Montana State College, and you see the amazing jump of 145% increase from 1945 to 1946 with the end of the war. And that seismic increase was never realized again. It's interesting when we plot in red the period of World War II and plot in green the GI Bill and the Korean War, and you see the dips with the 2 wars and how the students then left, predominantly male students, obviously. And then with the increase of new housing in Bozeman at about 1950 to 1954, how those increases coincided. So that graph alone tells a lot of history about America, but also about Montana State College, later become Montana State University. Some of the development, if you look right here, these are some of the 1947 classroom buildings, Quonset huts for the military sciences department. One building that still exists today, if you know the Wool Lab, this is 11th Street, going towards the stadium. Montana Hall is here just for reference. Columbus is just right off this corner. You can't quite see it yet at this time. But here's some of the infill of Quonset hut housing, and then all the housing that was along here and off the picture. This is a view in the early 1950s. Again, Montana Hall, a few houses coming in on this is Irving School, North 8th Avenue, and then College right along here. And no A&W, no Westgate Village Shopping Center, although there is an earlier Quonset hut building, probably utilized from the war surplus, that was an early restaurant in the 1950s. The first Parkway Grocery, and the beginnings of a gas station here. So the private developers trying to capitalize on this northwest corner of Montana State University campus by developing some of these areas between the residence areas and the university to develop a commercial strip along there. This is a 1960s map that shows kind of that build out. The main building to emphasize, this is a great view. Oops, I have to back up there. Have to go to, there it is. Here is Westgate Shopping Center. A&W stand for reference, the wool lab. Here are the Quonset huts of the Military Industries Department and the classrooms that were built. These are the later 1950s and 60s dormitories. And then this is the second Parkway Market when it got moved across the lot. So you can see all that range of development. So kind of the beginning of the history of the Westgate property comes from a momentary capture of history of Norma Anderson's 10th birthday party. And she lived right behind the L&H restaurant, which is in the Quonset hut. And this is right where Westgate Shopping Center, Columbo's would be. These are those military classroom buildings across College. And they had just built this house, and you see this distinctive window here and this distinctive window here. If you go there today, here are the two distinctive windows, and here is the back of the Westgate Shopping Center. So proof that the L&H restaurant from an old Quonset hut was there just prior to acquisition of the property and the building of Westgate Shopping Center. This is an interesting shot. This is a Sanborn fire insurance map from 1927, but I'm not sure quite what happened, but by the 1950s, they didn't want to pay the subscription to have it remapped. So if you look really closely, this is a piece of paper that was redrawn and painted and glued onto the 1927 map to show what happened in 1960. And if you look really closely, underneath that pasted on a piece of paper is a dark image of the original Quonset hut from 1959 revision. A lot of information in a historic record. And again, here's the corner of College and 11th. Here's Anderson's house where the birthday party photo was taken. This is the future home of the A&W Drive-In, now FedEx and various shops here. A lot of infill with housing since that time. And then the Quonset hut with additional attachment to the building of the original L&H restaurant. And this is before the Dorothy's restaurant and the gas station on this corner. So, and this is just a shot from 54 to 55, again showing the brand new construction underway. Here's the foundation excavation for the next dormitory. This is the 1947 post-World War II family housing that was there, and that had to be torn down for the rest of those dormitory buildings. And here's the Hut Restaurant, A&W, and Joe's Parkway Market right there. So the history of the Westgate property, and I won't bore you with all these details. If anybody wants me to help you with your insomnia, I will give you these sheets at your leisure. But It all began after the United States expanded into Indian Territory, and in 1875 a U.S. land grant was given 160 acres to George Fraser in this area. And of course, very little development except for some farms and a few houses that he allowed people to be there. And then the initial subdivision approval in 1892 of the park addition to Bozeman. This was quite early for the northwest end of Bozeman, and most of the residences or buildings, but mainly residences in that subdivision, didn't really occur until the 1900s or 1940s. So this is the part of the history of the property where we go from down here on the bottom, the sale of the property from Jorgensward, Henry Jorgensward and his wife Lydia, who owned the L&H restaurant, L for Lydia, H for Henry. Probably fortunately they didn't call it Jorgensward's restaurant, because I could not remember that one even today. But that in 1957, in June of 1957, he and then the other adjoining property lots were sold to Walter Bruce Mecklenburg, who later became quite a developer of Bozeman. And here's Bruce Mecklenburg, and he was born in 1925 in Bozeman, attended Bozeman High, worked as a cattle broker with his father, attended MSc with a degree in architecture, but started becoming involved with real estate and buying and selling houses and different things. And he did purchase the property on West College Street for the Westgate Shopping Center. And if you look at the records, he purchased it in June of '57, and the building was open for business in November of '57. So either he was doing a little bit of head start work before the deed was signed, or it was a lot easier to get something built in those days. And by 1958, he didn't want anything to slow him down, so he sold the Westgate Shopping Center to Cyrus Chase, who owned it for quite a few years, and then moved on to his next project. He also, in the 1970s, founded Mecklenburg Realty Company, developed University Mall, which later became known as Gallatin Valley Mall. So he kind of cut his teeth on building shopping centers with the Westgate Shopping Center, and then moved on. In 1989, he also brokered the sale of the Flying D Ranch to Ted Turner, pretty significant thing in Bozeman or Gallatin County history, but also to his bank account, I'm sure. And then in 2010, passed away in Bozeman. So we're trying to do some research in the future on shopping centers in Bozeman, and trying to talk with some of his relatives to see what information they might still have. Mecklenburg also knew Hugo Eck from Bozeman. They were both members of the Methodist Church. And what's interesting is looking through a lot of Hugo Eck's information and designs. He did a lot of work for members of the Methodist Church. He also donated a lot of the land where the Methodist-owned Bozeman Deaconess Hospital and Hillcrest Senior Living Center is located. This is a little bit about his history. And he was, Hugo Eck was regionally renowned as a practitioner of high modernism architecture. He started out in Butte and Anaconda with his father, who was a carpenter and a construction guy, and was really good at developing the drawings and the plans. He then went to MSc and got a degree in architecture, wanted to serve in the military during World War II, but due to health conditions, he couldn't do that, so he became a ship's architect, where he really honed his skills on efficient design of utilizing space and materials to make something extremely functional, and that really translated on to his history of architecture. He built private residences, hospitals, redesigned, after being in the hospital at Bozeman Deaconess down on Lammy Street, After about a week in a hospital bed, he completely redesigned with new technology how hospital rooms could be serviced. So all that new technology with EKG ports and oxygen and vacuum ports and everything else, he redesigned those for Bozeman Deaconess. He also had a contract to redo the surgical room, Hillcrest Senior Living Center, and then also that Dorothy's Cafe, which is located across the street. We think he designed that. We're still working on that one. And numerous private residences and also some fraternity and sorority houses at MSC. So the history of Westgate Shopping Center. The press announcements come out in October of 1957 that the Westgate Shopping Center is soon to be open, and it talks about the different businesses that are going to be there and what's going to happen, and that they're also announcing that there's part of the promotion of the grand opening would be a contest to name the center. So prior to this time, there's no name for this shopping center, which is no real problem because there's no other shopping center in Bozeman, so it's just a shopping center. A lot of different advertisements came out in subsequent weeks, and they kept emphasizing $500 in prizes, grand opening, how to enter, how to win, and then acknowledgments to everybody who worked on the building, the plumbers, the electricians, bricklayers. So a lot of historic information that we'd then be able to take from this ad and then move into research of all the different people and the companies and the businesses that worked on this. And again, more, it becomes a bigger, now we're up to $1,000 in prizes. You know, it went from 500 a week ago, now we're up to 1,000. And this was a big event, and if you look at the ad here, this was as big as David Niven, June Allison, and the Flesh and Spur Western movie showing in the Ellen Theater. And don't forget, we have free ice cream, coffee, cake, men's neckties, cigars, and live baby Christmas trees. So quite a, you know, whatever they could find to pull together to keep this thing going. And then the grand opening. On the weekend of November 30th, December 1st, 1957, we had Gallatin Drug Company, which moved from their store on the corner of Black and Main. They closed that down, had a moving sale, which has another 10 ads about that. They moved up to Westgate Shopping Center. There was the Skirt and Sweater Shop, which that year became the Village Casuals Women's Wear. There's also Hausman's Ski and College Shop. And they kept their main store on Main Street. And of course, Marilyn Hausman was very important in Bozeman history as one of the prime developers of Bridger Ski Area and an inventor of a T-bar at that time. There was also Crecep's Menswear, which was a downtown business. And of course, the good old Lydia and Howard Cafe that went in there. So now this is a very, very interesting part of the history. So after it opened, so a week later, on December 6th, we announced the winners of the Name the Shopping Center contest. And it is the Westgate Village. And you see the first, second, third, fourth prizes there. And we blow that out. First prize winner is Walter Sales, lived on North Wilson. And he won a $419 Telefunken radio and hi-fi set. I did a little calculations with an inflation calculator, and that's equal to winning a $4,475 stereo today. So that's quite amazing. However, do a little research on the city sign permits. And this one is, so this ad comes out in the 6th of December. He signs the sign permit approving the erection of the sign for Westgate Village on the 10th. So 4 days later, he signs all that. Oh my gosh, look who signed that. You see that? It's Walter Sales, the building inspector for the city of Bozeman. So history's kind of a funny thing, and history's an extreme history sometimes. So this might be something that we want to tell you. We also have a few tidbits of information from tenant occupants, including Bill Murdoch, who had Bridger Sports a little bit later, who told me some stories about working with Walter Sales on behalf of the city and what he had to do to make a fireproof rooftop sign and things like that. But I think statute of limitations are up, but I don't want to mention those at this point. So then we looked at a lot of the Polk City directories for Bozeman and built a history of all the tenants of all the units, all 5 units, and then some of the units got combined through time. And we had 31 different businesses from 1957 to 2022. And again, starting with those original 5. And this is midway through a word from our sponsor, the great change of Karl Marx's Pizza, which was purchased by Joe and Janet Colombo, and then became Colombo's Pizza. So, ta-da, there's that one. And then some of the more recent years. And pizza. Where would Bozeman, MSU, and I think Seth and I talked one time that every neighborhood needs a pizza place, right? But here's the original sign of Karl Marx's Pizza with family night, and I think it's $1.50 off on a large pizza, which would be interesting to know if it was maybe $2 for the whole pizza. So pictures of Karl Marx's, and then that same sign used now today by Columbus. So this is one of the historic signs that will be maintained, painted, repaired, and sit in its own location. In 1982, a few of the pictures, you can see the A&W over on the other corner, which is the parking lot of the FedEx building, and then Bridger Mountain Sports, which took over from Houseman's, which used to be over here, but they wanted a bigger space, and after the drugstore moved, they took that one. Cactus Records was actually here for a while. Accent Camera, next door saloon, and Karl Marx Pizza next to it, which then they knocked the door in between so you could go to the saloon and or the pizza or back and forth, and then that gave way to Colombo's Pizza having both spaces. Just a few more shots of same type of thing. One architectural detail I want to mention are some of these nice louvers. Some of them are missing, some of them go away and then come back again, and that's an architectural detail that was there originally, and so we want to see that those go back. And then the co-op was there in 1984-85. And I stick these in because this photo's a little bit later, but in that previous slide, these louvers were gone, but now they're back. And then these are here, and now they're gone. This is inside, if you can't remember what that co-op looked like. And then the good old mural. And then a really important thing is look at the reflection in the window of the co-op in 1984 at the Quonset Hut's Military Science Building across the street on College. Janet, do you remember all those? Yeah. So even a reflection in a window gives us a lot of history. Although it's reversed? No. It's just dirty. So we did a little bit of research, and this is kind of an extra project outside of Westgate, is to try and place the shopping center in Bozeman's history. Started researching other shopping centers, because we all know where the shopping centers are, and we kind of know where a few of them used to be, but no one knows exactly when they began. They just kind of drive by and, oh, there's a shopping center. Well, yeah, it's been there for 10 years. So you may recognize a few of these. The Palpy Center across from the high school, Buttrey Shopping Center still there today, Hinky Dink where Granny's Donuts is, and a few places up there, Beaver Pond Center, Heaps Food Center, a lot of these different ones. We kind of cut it off in 1988. This is a shot, 1964, this was given to me and told to be 1960, but there are quite a few buildings that were built in 62, 63, 64, so I've up to date to 1964. And this is Main Street. Here's the courthouse. This is Bozeman High, which was built in 1960. How many of you went to Bozeman High? A few, yeah. So you know more of this than I do. I wasn't able to finish high school. No, that's another story. The Palfy Center, which is right across the street from the high school with 2 hamburger stands. The Beaver Pond, I think, this is kind of blurry, but I think this is either when they're constructing Safeway and 19th would be here, and this is where the road starts to curve, and then the connection with the old county road, which became College, isn't even there then in the 60s. So a lot of history. This is just a quick shot of the Palfy's building. A lot of architectural, not a lot, but a few architectural details that are similar to the Westgate building, but also similar to some Fred Wilson buildings. So Richard Brown and I are working on that to try to figure out who built this and a little bit more about the history of that building. Good old Buttrey's. How many people remember Buttrey's? How many people show up there? Yeah, good. Of course, they didn't want to be outdone by Westgate's grand opening, so we're up to $6,000, including a car. So, I don't know, I'm not sure if this is the car or not. That included Brown's Hardware, a Cleaners, a drugstore, Buttrey's, an expansion, a Magic Chef hamburger stand, which is kind of stuck out in the wrong place out in here, and became an early superstore, groceries and department stores. And then Heed's Food Center, which originally was on Main Street, East Main, 200 block in 1947. In 1964, they moved down to West Main. But again, just a few details that are similar. The full-length windows, the window transoms above the doors, the inset panels, some of the things that are similar to the Palfy Shopping Center and to the Westgate Village. And then the cool signs. So then we get into the Westgate architecture, and we have a handful of sheets of designs that Hugo Eck did, but we don't have the final construction drawings. But originally, I'll try to zoom through some of these. This is the A&W. This would be where FedEx and the coffee shop and the salon is now. Apartments are here, more houses going down here. Existing house, that's the Anderson house from the birthday party. And the original design was a 6 or 7 unit space here, a supermarket over here, parking off the alley, and a little bit more detail, but you can see already, even though this is a little bit different shape and form and number of buildings, the details of the foundation wall, the full height glass, the glass transoms above the door, the treatment, the flat roof, and the step down flat roof. Also, we have this is before the building was built and occupied. They're showing Houseman Sports being here, and they show a restaurant being here, and they show a drugstore being in this building. And those are the 3 elements that were there. So obviously, Eck and Mecklenburg were thinking about what was to come. Again, this is that fire insurance map of what actually was built with the restaurant, the bigger drugstore. S stands for shop. And then this is the A&W. And this is the closest drawing that Eck did to the building with 5 units and a restaurant on this end, but they're all about the same size, not what they ended up being. And that same detail with a step-down roof, although there's only one step-down now. And the door placements are a little bit different. But basically the same building, just some final changes. And there you can see it now. We have the one step down on the roof. We have 2 doors on the left. We had a door in the center for this unit and a door in the center for this unit. So the architecture, the style is the modern contemporary style, which was very prevalent from 1930s on, but especially in the 1950s. And it really stressed functionality, minimal or no ornamentation, had open space plans, exposed structure. You could actually see the walls and the roof members, things like that. Use of modern materials like reinforced concrete, concrete block units, and open floor plans, abundance of glass to let in natural light, horizontal design with flat roofs, all those kinds of things. The period of significance that we've defined, even though a building keeps changing through time as it's maintained and altered, the period of significance for the National Register we've determined for 1957 up. And actually, I goofed that up. It should be 1957 to 1968. Got a typo. Jenny, you were supposed to check that for me. And the retention of architectural elements, as I mentioned earlier in detail, is about 90%. So not a lot has changed on this building other than paint color and a few trim pieces and things like that can be easily replaced. The significant architectural elements of the Westgate Village, and I'll just zoom through these, but that rectangular form, the flat built-up roof, all of those elements that are characteristic of a 1950s style and a Hugo X style. And the arrangement of the parking lot. You saw the evolution of the designs that Hugo Eck had, where the building was right up at the sidewalk and the parking was in the alley or on the corner, to actually moving it back and having people park right in front of the building. So National Register eligibility. The main element to actually get into the nomination process is the building needs to be 50 years of age. And I will sadly say that I'm a little bit depressed to now be working on a building that was built after I was born. But that's a whole nother slideshow. But building needs to also exhibit historical significance, either locally, regionally, or nationally. It's not just if a building's old, let's put it up there, because obviously if I'm old, am I significant? That's a whole other topic. And if the building retains integrity of location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. There's a lot in that book of what makes a building eligible for nominating to the National Register. So from our work and then processing that work with the State Historic Preservation Office and their architects, they're the arbiters of those decisions to take something to a nomination. And they've agreed and determined that of the 4 criteria, it meets for A and C. A being the association of events that have made a significant contribution to the broad pattern of history. And in this case, it's mid-century, post-World War II economic expansion in the United States. And then C is that the property embodies a distinctive characteristic of a type, period, or method of construction that represents a work of a master or possesses a high artistic value. And a lot of people would say, okay, how do you evaluate that building in terms of artistic value compared to another building? And it's not to compare apples and oranges, but does it have in and of itself? And based on mid-century modern architecture, this one fits. We tried to work a bit with the role of Hugo Eck and Colombo's Pizza as being significant historic event associations of lives and persons, but they felt that was a little too local and not quite regional. So we need to get some more ads on the screen to beef up the popularity of all the pizza, to maybe gain that one. Just as a side note, criteria D is something that can yield more information or having research value. That's generally reserved for archaeological sites where there are no structures above ground, but the site itself may have more information, so it may be eligible solely for So the historic preservation element, and some of this touched on before, we've done the historic preservation plan and the sign plan. The ideas are to paint to the original color palette and consistent colors, to develop a repair and maintenance plan, replace certain doors, trim, and louvered sunshades to their original style, replace some of the windows. As Karl Marx and Columbus expanded and the separate entrance to the saloon was gone, this door was removed and this T111 was covering some of those windows. So part of our plan is to look at redoing these windows, making them obscure so you don't see the kitchen. They would serve the same purpose, but they would be more like what was designed at the time, which would reflect this. And then to get a better, more consistent, as opposed to natural posts, green posts, white posts, brown posts, and then get the louvers back on there. And then a consistent sign plan on the historic sign frames that are up there. So why do we do all this? A lot of people know Mount Vernon or the Sistine Chapel or the Story Mansion, places like this. And you know, it doesn't take much of, wow, that's a unique and interesting building and is worthy of preservation. But when you drive down College, dodging pedestrians, because the crosswalks are not listed on the National Register, so we're not going to use those anymore. Everybody's running around there. The last thing you're looking at is the building. You're thinking, oh, that's right, I want to stop and have pizza or something like that. So if you highlight this building and the history of the building, the architecture of the building, and the significance of the building to the community, it can become as important as those very extreme, pardon me, use the word extreme elements of architecture that you see in the great mansions and the great buildings that have been designed. But we know from a lot of our work that the common residences of employees of the railroad, the small bakeries and shops, may have their own historic and architectural significance. And the most important thing to think of is that the best way to preserve history is to research a project, to document it, present it to the public, and to pursue preservation of artifacts and buildings. You know, once we lose the buildings, once we lose the story, once no one knows where the records are, we've lost that element of history. So one of the best ways to really proliferate the history of the Westgate Shopping Center is to actually have the exact building still there, not just a couple of photographs in some newspaper. Preserved buildings add to the cultural aesthetic and capital and the variety of the community, as opposed to tearing down many buildings and building brand new buildings, which may be equally as significant someday architecturally and historically. You end up getting a similar palette through time. It's nice to have a real mixture of buildings. And Bozeman, I think, has a start on that, from buildings from the last part of the 1900s right up to Westgate Shopping Center. Also, it's been proven that historic preservation of the original buildings retains higher property values, which then in turn allows for a higher tax base going to the cities. Double-edged sword, but it's really good to keep the old with the new. And also, historic preservation is a unique form of resource and energy conservation. The embodied energy, all that energy that went into building that building, is there. If any building is removed, it takes energy to do that. And then you've lost all that energy. And then you take all the energy to move all that material to a landfill, and you consume a landfill. Then you take all that energy to build new bricks and new glass and new steel and new wood and build a new building. All the energy to erect that building. It's very environmentally, economically sound to, whenever possible, reuse an older building. So each one of these 4 points, I really want to pass it back to Seth and Cassie and Janet for their efforts to really help on these 4 points. So long list of acknowledgements here, folks who have helped out and a lot more behind the scenes. And a little bit of my information, so if anybody wants that. And otherwise, I think we're just shy of an hour. If anybody has any questions, or better yet, if you've got more information than I have, I would love hearing from you.